Well, what a wild old weekend round 17 was. Can you believe it? Round 17 already this AFL season. It's a longie, but I tell you what, it is moving quite quickly. And every week from now on in feels like a massive one. Round 17, some results went the way of teams looking to get their way into the top 8 and the top 4. The top 2 teams both went down. Sydney and Carlton both got beaten in round 17. So fascinating round of footy. The upcoming round's even bigger. I'll get to that at the absolute end of the show. The Bombers, let's start there. They silenced a few doubters. I wasn't necessarily a doubter. I didn't know and still don't know whether they can make a sustained run at maybe a grand final or a premiership, certainly this year, but they certainly did the job when it came to last Friday night. And did they end the premiership defence for Collingwood? I'll get to that in a moment. I said this week on Melbourne radio that Collingwood's premiership defence was over. I do stand by that, and I'll elaborate on that in a little while. The Roos, they stunned the stinky Suns. Gee, that was a disappointing performance from Gold Coast, particularly in the first 5 or 6 minutes of the game. The Roos had 2 goals on the board, and the Suns had barely touched the footy. They'd barely had a meaningful possession or a chain of possession in the game. That is a snapshot into the mindset of the Suns. To really get overrun in the first few minutes of the game was incredibly disappointing. And when you lose by 4 points, you can look back and wonder, had we have been able to hit the ground running from the absolute first bounce, would the result have been different? But in the end, what a disappointing performance from the Suns. That's all I'll speak on when it comes to the Suns. We can put them to the side. They don't deserve a lot of our time, anyone's time, because we keep asking ourselves the same questions and we keep getting the same answer. They're not for real, particularly when it comes to getting on the road and beating anyone, let alone big teams in big games. Speaking of stunning upsets and performances, what about the Sainters? I've been a big-time knocker of the Saints, probably more so the way they've tried to play the game. But on the weekend against the number 1 seed, the big dog, the Sydney Swans, they just wouldn't lie down, the Saints. They had a couple of periods in the game where I thought, well, Sydney have built a match-winning lead and the Saints will probably roll over and cop a 4 or 5 goal defeat, but they just would not go away. And that was a really impressive performance. They're able to score the ball, put up, good numbers when it comes to the scoreboard. And the Swans all of a sudden have dropped 2 on the spin, 2 on the bounce. Are there question marks there? Have they been going too well for too long? Are they starting to stumble into September? I'm not getting too nervous just yet. They've got the Kangas this week back at home. If they drop that, the alarm bells start to certainly go off. The Lions are charging toward not only the top 8, you need to really investigate the ladder. They are charging toward finishing 3rd, probably 4th on the table. They are really in the hunt. And look, I don't think anyone wants to bump into them. I said this last week on the show. No one really wants to bump into Brisbane come September, even if it is an elimination final, a knockout final in Melbourne or interstate, on foreign territory for them. The reason I don't think you'd want to see them is they are going to be an informed team of the competition. They are going to be a team who has peeled off, 10 of 12 or 11 of 13 games on the run in. Such has been their form since starting the season 0-3 or 0-4, whatever they started their season off. So they are a dangerous team. They're not last year's version. They're not going. I worked their game against Adelaide on radio. They're not going as well as they were last year. So they're not that formidable, scary proposition. But certainly they're playing some really good footy. They're a different team. They've got really different personnel. And the young guns, the Cubs, again, something I spoke about last week, the Lion Cubs are the ones I think really driving things, particularly when it comes to the energy, the enthusiasm, and the life in this team. And Lachie Neale and Josh Dunkley, they were gigantic against the Crows. They had 60 plus, kicked 4 goals between them as well. They were the difference in the contest. And I'll give you a list because everyone loves a list. And this week, it's going to be the top 5 most improved players in the competition. I put this out on Twitter, and it went absolutely berserk on X, I should say, the artist formerly known as Twitter. And people just kept throwing names at me. And one thing that hit me in the face is there should be an award for this. We see it in the American sports, and I know some of you will say, well, we don't need to copy the Americans every single time. But I think rewarding those 2 things stand out to me. And the first, I guess, is a little more personal than it should be. But those who make the squad of 40 in the All-Australian, well, which was 40, is now 44, but don't make the 22, they get no recognition. They get no real recognition. They don't receive anything for doing so, but it's a great achievement to be in the best 44 players in the competition. And the other one is the most improved player in the competition. You can mount a case, the best defender in the game, when all of the awards seemingly go to the midfielders. We've got a Coleman medal for the forwards, and I'm looking forward to talking about that next week, Coleman medals, and whether they actually mean that much, the way the game is played in 2024. But do we need to formalise something when it comes to most improved? So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into the top 5 most improved players in the game. And a little quick chat on Tom Stewart as well. They've figured it out, the Cats. Of course, Chris Scott was always going to figure out how to continue Tom Stewart's influence on that team and on the games that the Cats play in. But firstly, back to the Pies. And I did say on Sunday crunch time on SEN that the Pies Premiership defence was over. Now, I didn't say that to try and garner a reaction. I try to avoid those type of comments where possible. I try to be honest, but I try not to say things just to ensure that people get outraged or engage and click. I try and have some thought behind the things I say. And the reason I think Collingwood's Premiership defence is likely over, now they may well make a fool of me because they're a resilient football team and they've still got plenty of stars in their team, particularly in the middle part of the ground. But I think Brodie Myercheck's absence will be such and so impactful that they may even struggle to make the 8. Therefore, their Premiership defence is obviously over. But the reason why I think Myercheck is so important, he's one of the harder working forwards in the game. I'm going to get to the hardest working big forward in the game a little bit later. But Myercheck works his tail off. He creates spillages in the forward half of the ground, which brings the small guys into the game. It brings Bobby Hill. It brings Lachie Schultz. It brings Bo McCreary into the game because he's able to compete on balls that would otherwise be marked by the opposition. You only have to go and look at the contest where he injured his pec. Most forwards, particularly most big key forwards, would just happily stand the mark, not even compete on that ball. But he's willing to throw himself into any contest that he can, and that's what makes him so valuable. That's the first part. The other part is the genuine productivity. He's good for basically 2 goals a game. And players who can kick 2 goals per game or more are incredibly hard to find. You only see around 15 players, a dozen to 15 players every year average 2 goals per game. He fits into that mold. He was high up last year in the Coleman medal. He was good for a couple of goals a game, and that's hard to replace. And what he also does, being the primary key forward, is he allows the next guy to play their natural role. So he allows Kruger, who's only 192, 193 centimetres, to be the second tall forward. Or he allows Mason Cox to float in and out of the game, take a mark here or there, sometimes not be in the forward line. So he allows others to play their natural role. He allows Jamie Elliott to play as a detached full forward, 80, 90, 100 metres away from the ball. So I think others now have to play roles that they're not comfortable with playing. Do they have to throw Billy Frampton back into the forward line? And I know he did a job on grand final day, but he's not really going to threaten you. For Pies fans, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, go and have a look at what life was like without Myercheck and others against the Western Bulldogs a little while ago. I think Oleg Markov was down there as a marking target. They had absolutely nothing to kick to. No disrespect to Markov. I think he's a fantastic player, but he's not going to get the job done for you as a marking forward. Kruger's still trying to find his way. He's been injured more than he's been out there. Ash Johnson's had numerous opportunities to try and solidify a position in the team, hasn't been able to do so. And Mason Cox is still some weeks away from resuming, and they've been keener to use their ruckman on and off the bench more so than in the forward line. So they'll be forced to use Cox in the forward line when and if he can get back. So I think Mychek's loss is massive. And I know you'll say Daniel McStay off an ACL is not far away. He might be back this week. He might be back next week. But to ask him to step straight in as the primary key forward, he's never been a big goal kicker anyway. He's never been better than 1.2 to 1.5 goals per game. He likes to get up the ground and hit the logos and be more of a moving forward than a hulking competitive forward inside 50 like Mychek. So it's a big, big ask to expect Daniel McStay to come back in and play the role that Mychek was playing and play it with the same level of effectiveness. So I know Jeremy Howe's down there. He can play a part. He can be helpful. Darcy Moore is a absolutely left field option to go forward. But I'll tell you what, I do stand by my view. No Mychek, no Collingwood. I don't think they can win the premiership without him. Now let's get to this list. A little bit of fun. The top 5 most improved players in the competition. Some apologies straight away. Had a couple of hundred replies on Twitter when it came to this topic. Some apologies straight away. Jake Saligo of Adelaide, he's an apology. He burst onto the scene as a midfielder this year, but he's waned. His form has dropped right off. He looks like a tired player to me, a tiring young player in his first full season as a midfielder, but he's certainly burst onto the scene. He'll be even better for it next year. He could make this list once again if he can take his game to the next level. Ben Miller is another one, Richmond defender who filled in as a ruckman, filled in as a forward at different stages. He looks good down back. He's been under fire. Of course, Richmond have been conceding big scores, but he's done an admirable job back there. So he's an apology. Trent Rivers, maybe this list has come up a little bit too quickly for him. He'll make a late charge. Ever since moving into the midfield permanently, he just looks at home. He looks 25 plus. He makes good decisions. He's a neat ball user. And he looks like he'll be a midfielder permanently moving forward. And then the Essendon duo, I really wanted to fit these two into the list, both of them. I was going to do the old slack trick, the on the fence job, and put both in at number 5, have 6 in a list of 5. But Jai Caldwell and Sammy Durham, they have transformed the Essendon midfield. I know it's largely about Zach Merrett and how good he's been, but these two have added the edge. Talk about the Essendon edge. It's Caldwell's grunt around the footy. It's Durham's ability to play on the opposition's best player, but also have an impact offensively for his team. So they're all apologies, which again speaks to how many players have improved so much this season and how some have gone from good players to elite players. Some have gone from bit part fringe players to very, very good players. At 5, it's the North Melbourne ruckman, Tristan Sherry. I know his name was thrown at me more than anyone else's when I put this topic out there on X. His name was the one that kept coming up. The Roos fans were loud, but plenty of neutrals did suggest him as well. And his rise has been considerable and quite sudden. He's among the more consistent ball winners for ruckman in the competition. He rates above average or better for tackles, for clearances, for contested possession, and he's managed to kick 4 goals in his past 4 games as well. So he's added that element to his game. He's not just about the in and under, the tough stuff. He's got the helmet on. He's burrowing in. He's laying tackles. He's an outside chance to pinch the All-Australian blazer in the ruck, and that is not far-fetched. He's behind a couple, but if he can continue at this rate of knots, if North Melbourne can win a few more games, he'd have to come under some consideration, certainly to make the squad of 44. So some will say he's too low, but Tristan Sherry at number 5. At number 4, the big kahuna, Josh Tracy, the big man from Freo. Again, I've got to put my hand up. I've done it as much as I possibly can. I was so wrong about this guy. I didn't see him turning into this type of player. I reckon physically he's leaned up, or he's leaned down, I should say. He looks fantastic. He's ripped. He's thin through his upper body. I reckon he was at least a couple of kilos heavier in the early part of his career. And he's so much better in basically every aspect of the game than I thought he was. He's a good field kick. He's creative. He's incredibly clean below his knees for a big guy. He's good on the lead. He's a great set shot for goal. And he's not that far away from being the number one performed all-around key forward in the competition. He's yet to have a goalless game, so the consistency is there. He's kicked his 35 goals, which if he can continue on at that rate, he'll kick close enough to 50 for the campaign. So he's looking the goods. He's been able to impact the game in so many different ways. He's physical, he's competitive, he's got great skills, and he's been one of the major reasons why Fremantle have jumped up the ladder in 2024. So Josh Tracy at 4. At 3, Jake Waterman, the fellow big dog over there in the West. He never, ever put together a full season of footy, really. Even when he was an understudy or a wingman to Jack Darling, to Josh Kennedy, or to Oscar Allen, as someone just goes bang, bang, with some materials in the background. I do work out of my shed. Jake Waterman is having a massive season. A massive season. He's undersized for a full forward, or for a key forward, I should say, but he's playing as a stay-at-home full forward. He's a hard-working guy. So, he used to be able to get up and down the ground and hit the wings. Now I reckon he's doing all of his work inside forward 50. He stays on the move. His previous best return in terms of goals was 18, and that was from 20 games. So less than a goal a game. He's going to go close to 50 this season. He hasn't had a lot of help inside that forward 50. Oscar Allen's only returned to the team in the past couple of weeks. So Jake Waterman at 3. Number 2, big TDK, Tom De Koning. Perhaps some of his improvement was in the latter part of last year, particularly in the finals. But ever since taking over from Mark Pitnett, he has exploded to be the number one big dog for Carlton. His possession win rate has exploded. He's been north of 20 across the past month and a half. His clearances, his contested possession rate, his tackles have all gone through the roof. He did bump into a big dog on the weekend, Kieran Briggs, who I thought got the points and was massive in that game. But certainly Tom De Koning's form has exploded. And he, speaking of Tristan Sherry, perhaps stealing the All-Australian ruckman position, Tom De Koning is in the mix as well. And number 1, and I know I'll have to probably explain this because he's been an All-Australian in the past, but he was an All-Australian half-forward flanker. In my opinion, he was almost a tease as a player. He's an All-Australian lock. He's a contender to win the Brownlow medal, whether he's allowed to or not, because he's up for some tribunal, some MRO issue as I sit down on a Monday afternoon. It's Isaac Heaney. I think he's the most improved player in the game. He's a lock for All-Australian. He's been the best midfielder in the competition, in the best performed team in the competition. His numbers are through the roof. He's been north of 20 in almost every game. He's been 1.6 to 1.7 goals per game for a midfielder. He has been absolutely epic across 2024. Does his form start to taper? Because I do firmly believe in the difficulty that players have going into their first full season as a midfielder. You've seen Jake Saligo really drop off with some fatigue. You're just banging into bodies 80, 90 times a game at stoppage. Does Heaney, who's more mature physically, he's got more legs under him and more conditioning under him than Saligo does, but does he start to just fatigue in the latter part of the season? But for now, he's the most improved player in the game. So 5 is Tristan Sherry, 4 Josh Tracy, 3 Jake Waterman, 2 Tom De Koning, and number 1 Isaac Heaney. Yeah, fair or foul? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Did I miss anyone? I did miss a few because there are so many. Make sure you leave a comment in the comments section. and give me your views. All right, a few quick ones to round us out. To ruck or not to ruck? That's the question. Geelong and Hawthorn on the weekend. So Geelong effectively went in without a recognised number one big man. Sam De Koning and Mark Blitzav's shared duties, and maybe in a month or two we'll be saying Sam De Koning is a genuine ruckman. And the Hawks had Lloyd Meek. So Lloyd Meek was solid, 13 disposals, 4 clearances, and had 47 hitouts. So he dominated the hitouts. But the Cats were able to get the job done, in terms of their two guys who played in the ruck, but around the ground. De Koning had 20 disposals, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, 15 hitouts, and a couple of sausage rolls, whilst Mark Blitzav's kicked a goal as well. He had 16 touches, he laid 4 tackles, and had 3 clearances. So if you have a look at the numbers, Meeks had 13 touches. The Geelong Rucks have had 36 between them. The hitouts were heavily in favour of the Hawks. Meek had 4 clearances. The Cats boys combined for 7, and they kicked 3 goals between them versus Meek's 0. So interesting sort of set of circumstances, interesting philosophy differences. I know the Cats are doing it, in part because they have to, but it's just interesting to see how you can perhaps get away without playing a big number one ruckman and still get the job done. Speaking of ruckman and speaking of De Konings, and I mentioned him in the top 5 most improved players list, Tom De Koning. He was like that big boy who'd been dominating the schoolyard. Well, he ran into a bigger bully on the weekend. Kieran Briggs was mammoth. And I know De Koning still had a big game. He had 24 disposals, and he was still a good player for his team. But Kieran Briggs was so impactful in that game. You really needed to watch the game to understand how much impact Briggs had in the contest. He had 22 touches of his own, laid 9 tackles, was dominant in the hitouts, had 40 hitouts. He had 8 score involvements, so he was impactful in terms of chains of possession that led to scores, and he had 10 clearances of his own. He was so big in that game. He'd be close enough to BOG in that contest. One guy who might be vying for best on ground honours in that game was a former D and a former Docker. I think he's the hardest working key forward in the game. Jesse Hogan. He's now a giant in every sense of the word, not only because of the team he plays for, but the way he plays the game. He was huge. I know Charlie Curnow's chasing history, chasing his 3rd straight Coleman medal, but Hogan, I think, is the number one performed key forward in the game, certainly over the past 6 or 8 weeks. He works his tail off. He plays to win. He fights tooth and nail to always be in front. He contests relentlessly in the air, 15 disposals, 9 marks, laid 5 tackles, and kicked 5 goals against the Blues. I know Jacob Wiedering was hobbled considerably in that game, but that's got nothing to do with Hogan. He just played the game as he saw fit. He's number 3 in the competition for goals, so he's 3rd on the Coleman table. He's number 1 in the game for marks inside 50 and number 3 in the game for contested marks on the season. And he does work alongside a couple of young key forwards who are really trying to forge a career. Jake Riccardi's a little more established, but Aaron Cadman certainly is a long way from being a finished product. So he's been working very, very well, considering a couple of his other wingmen are still trying to find their way. And Hogan's career turnaround, we know he's always been incredibly talented. He burst onto the scene with the Ds, but it's been so admirable to watch him, fight his way back, work his way back to prominence. And I love to watch him play. One man who can help Hogan and can help the Giants, and I know their performance, against the Blues was huge, was epic. After being down 8-2, I think it was at quarter time. They kicked 14 of the next 16. But Toby Greene, he can give the Giants so much more. He's just not quite where he needs to be. He's not quite at the levels of last season. He was the All-Australian captain last year. And I dug up a couple of stats. I had a look at his numbers from last year versus this year. So Toby Greene, he's got 20 less goals than this time last year. But last season, he played 21 games that he played in. He had 2+ goals, or he kicked 2+ goals 21 times, and 17 games last year, he had 15+ disposals and 2+ goals in the game. So 17 times he had 15 or more and kicked 2 or more in the game. This season, he's only had 5 games with 15+ and 2+. And in 8 of his 15 games this year, he's either kicked 1 or 0 goals. The upside in him is just gigantic. If he can get going, if he can get back to his best in the latter part of the season, the Giants can make another run. Certainly based on what we saw in quarters 2, 3, and 4 against the Blues, who I think have been the informed team of the past 6 or 7 weeks. If he can get going, absolutely look out. This week on the 7 AFL socials, I posed a question to you, one I've answered for myself, but is Essendon skipper Zach Merrett the best kicking midfielder in the game? I say yes. I think he's got every kick in the book. He can hit the short kicks. He can hit the intermediate kicks. He's fantastic kicking to a leading forward, and his run and carry and long kicking can eat up the meters gained for his team. And he's one of those mids who looks to kick. He looks to run and he looks to kick. I think he's the best kicking mid in the game. Go and check it out. Go check the video out on the 7 AFL socials and let me know. And finally, the Cats figured it out. Chris Scott was always going to figure out what to do with Tom Stewart. He's 5-time All-Australian defender. He'd been, almost tagged into submission at different stages. The Cats had conceded so much so that he was playing as a half forward not that long ago against the Blues when Alex Chincotta sat on him. But they figured it out, and Scott was always going to do so because he loves these types of challenges. He loves to outthink everyone else. He loves to come up with roles and responsibilities for his best players, and he did so. And he did it without really giving up the skill set that's made Stewart so good, his defensive prowess. So Stewart went to almost 75%, almost 3/4 of Geelong's centre bounces against Hawthorn. And he played initially as a midfielder, but he always set up as the midfielder on the defensive side of the stoppage for the Cats. So he was always defensive side of the stoppage for his team. And what would happen when the ball would leave the area was one of a couple of things. So when the Cats won the ball, he wouldn't chase the ball forward. He wouldn't go forward and try and impact the next contest. He would basically hover and then make position as if he was a +1 defender, waiting for the ball to come back if it were to come back in his area. If the ball was in dispute or if the ball was won by the Hawks, he was hightailing it. He was hauling ass to get back and be that extra defender, to be that guy who was going to be the +1 defender for his team. And the way, or the giveaway, I think, for opposition teams and the giveaway for us, he still had a really high number, I think almost double digits when it came to intercept possessions. Midfielders don't really have those types of numbers. So he's certainly he's starting as a midfielder, and his first phase of play is as a midfielder, but he's still playing as a defender. I think teams will catch up, and I think teams will still be able to tag Stewart, but all of a sudden, you don't need a defensive forward. You need someone who's comfortable at stoppage, because Stewart can hunt the ball if he needs to. He's a physical guy. He's got great speed. He's tough. He's great over a ground ball. So he can still impact around the footy, but you need someone who can go with him at stoppage and someone who can then get back and be with him when he gets behind the footy. So it's going to be interesting to see if teams can figure it out. The Cats and the Pies go at it on Friday night. So it'll be fascinating to see how Collingwood try and tackle that situation. Speaking of round 18, it's on the horizon. It's not that far away. And I tell you what, she's going to be an absolute beauty. You reckon round 17 was good. Channel 7, Friday night footy. Can't wait. The G will be almost packed. Collingwood and Geelong. That's going to be a massive game. The Pies almost must win. And Geelong, if they can win that, top 4 is back on the agenda for them. Hawthorn and Freo down in Tassie at Launceston. That's going to be a fascinating game. That's for the purists. That's for those who really love their footy. The Hawks need to win if they're going to sneak in to the top 8. And Freo are chasing not only top 4 for them, but they're probably chasing an unlikely spot in the top two. They might be able to finish second if a few things go their way. They'll have to win this game if they're to do so. They're 2-11 overall at York Park down there at Launceston, so they'll have to upend some of their history, but history means very little to this group. Not many of those have played in those 11 losses, but that's another great game. The Dogs and the Blues at Marvel Stadium under the lid. That's going to be huge for both. The Dogs were putrid last week. Carlton, as impressive a first quarter as you could hope to see, and then completely steamrolled after that. Can Charlie Curnow turn it on? The Dogs have got some personnel issues down back, and when you've got some tall defenders injured or under a cloud, you don't want to be bumping into Charlie Curnow, particularly at Marvel Stadium, as well as Harry Mackay coming off a bag of 5. The D's minus Max Gawn. That news has come out that Max Gawn's got an injury to his foot that's a little more serious than first thought. They play the Bombers, so we're trying to solidify their spot in the top 4. And then Gold Coast and the Power. I'm covering this game on radio for AFL Nation. It's big for both. If Port can pinch this, then all of a sudden the top 4 might even be open for them. And Gold Coast, they've just got to try and restore some respect amongst themselves. I know we'll all say, well, you won at home. Well done. That's what you always do, but you never win on the road. But I tell you what, dropping this game certainly puts their final spot in jeopardy. So that's a big game on Sunday, the early game on the Gold Coast, the Suns and the Power. So round 17 was gigantic. Round 18 is going to be next level. All the games mean so much at this stage of the season. Thanks for watching. Plenty of you have been watching, been loving the comments, been trying to get back to all of them on YouTube. Thanks for listening along. If you're listening via the podcast, keep it happening, keep it rolling, and I'll chat to you again next week.